Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa with me, Mariam Saab. Tonight, Central African Republic protesters who laid corpses at the UN's door after clashes are accused of staging propaganda by the organisation. Protesters say the dead were innocent civilians. Demining South Sudan. After more than 4 years of civil war, thousands of people have been killed or injured by landmines and unexploded ordnance. New minefields are still being unearthed around populated areas. And the Stompie Seipei murder continues to taint the legacy of Winnie Mandela. As South Africa mourns the late anti-apartheid activists, questions around the 15-year-old Seipei's death near Mandela's Soweto home continue to divide the nation. Let's begin in the Central African Republic. The UN says protesters who laid the bodies of at least 16 people in front of their MONUSCO mission headquarters in Bangui were using the corpses for propaganda. Protesters, however, say the dead were civilians killed in clashes between UN peacekeepers and armed groups in the capital's PK5 neighbourhood. Well, it's been reported that 21 people were killed, including 2 women and 2 children, and at least 40 people have been treated for gunshot wounds, according to Doctors Without Borders. Well, let's now hear from one of the protesters.
Is this a so-called disarming operation? I don't know, because on Tuesday there was an important MONUSCO contingent deployed in the PK5, the Rwandan contingent, who arrived near the roundabout in the 5th district and started shooting protesters, killing and wounding several people. We don't understand anything anymore. Is this mission about shooting civilians, or is it another kind of mission? We want an explanation, and that is why we're here. We brought these bodies to speak to the national and international audience so they can see what happened and to get an explanation.
We're now joined over the phone by Vladimir Monteiro, the spokesperson of the UN force in the Central African Republic. Mr. Monteiro, did UN forces shoot at protesters during Tuesday's operation?
Well, let us understand the context. On Tuesday, MINUSCA, the UN mission in Central African Republic, sent a patrol to stop heavy armed elements of criminal groups that were leaving PK5 to another district to confront with opponent groups. As part of our mission, we take action. We went to the place, and when our peacekeepers arrived, they were fired on. They were fired on by these armed elements, and we had to return fire in order to protect ourselves and to protect civilian population.
Well, is it possible that at this moment that innocent civilians were caught in the fray?
Well, on Tuesday, we were clashing with armed groups, heavily armed group people that were trying to move from an area to another one. And in order to stop that move, we had to open fire and to have an idea of how armed were these people. The clashes lasted at least 4 hours. They were prepared for combat, and they wanted to combat MINUSCA peacekeepers, but also the army of Central African Republic. And then we had to stop that action.
Well, 2 women and 2 children were reportedly killed. Are you investigating the circumstances of their deaths and how that happened?
There is no women and children as far as we know. The bodies that were brought to our HQ are part of the clashes that opposed heavily armed elements of criminal groups and MINUSCA peacekeepers.
Why are you characterizing this as an act of propaganda, as you've called it, on the protesters' part? Are you suggesting that those protesters are trying to discredit the UN force there?
The first thing we would like to say is that the violence in PK5 has caused a lot of losses of life, and we would like to express our condolences. With respect to the bodies that were brought, as you know, one of the main problems here in Central African Republic is rumors, but also several attempts to instrumentalize public opinion. The operation launched in PK5 aimed at putting an end to criminal activities of criminal groups and not targeting civilians and not targeting Muslim community, which is the main victim of these groups. It's the population of PK5 in Bangui who asked MINUSCA to take action to put an end to that activity. And to give you an idea that protection of civilians is one of our main concerns, on Sunday, when we were surrounded by civilian population who were protesting the operation against MINUSCA, we decided to withdraw in order to avoid civilian casualties.
Mr. Vladimir Monteiro, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here on France 24. We'll have to cut it there. Thank you. Moving to Somalia, where a bomb blast at a packed football stadium in Barawe has killed people and wounded 8 others, according to police. Now, witnesses say the bomb was buried in the stadium and exploded during a local match. Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for that blast. The city was a key Al-Shabaab stronghold before Somali and African Union forces seized the town and drove out the extremists who had banned sports activities in areas under their control. To Sierra Leone next, where Samura Kamara, the losing candidate in last month's presidential election, has appealed to the Supreme Court to overturn the result. Kamara claims in his petition that the electoral process was fundamentally flawed and the victory of Julius Maada Bio was invalid and cannot be supported in law. Now, the legal challenge points to alleged polling irregularities. Kamara secured 48.19% of the vote and had at one time pledged not to contest the outcome. In South Sudan, thousands have fallen victim to unexploded landmines, some of which were planted during the years South Sudan spent fighting for independence from Sudan. Now, clearing the mines is a challenging task. Many of the hazardous devices remain planted in heavily populated areas like schools, as Nicolas Jaman explains in this report.
A demining machine near a school in South Sudan, sadly a common view here. In the war-torn country, mines are often put down in populated areas. Since 2004, more than 5,000 people have been either killed or injured by landmines and unexploded ordnance.
The school's been closed, and that's for the safety of the children whilst the operation's taking place. However, you can also see how close the mines are to the school. So with the area was being denied to the school children, and that's one of the priorities.
According to the UN, more than 4 million mines and explosive devices have been found and destroyed in South Sudan these last 10 years. So it's vital for children here to learn about the dangers of landmines.
The miners, they came here in our school. Then they discovered that somewhere ahead there was a line, there was a bomb. So they came, then they demined it. But right now our life is safe, we can move anywhere.
South Sudan became independent from Sudan in 2011 after a long war during which millions of mines were strewn across the region. But in 2013, a civil war broke out in the world's youngest nation. Rebel groups accused the government of laying new explosives, but Juba has denied the allegations.
South Africa paid tribute to the late Winnie Mandela in Soweto on Wednesday. The anti-apartheid campaigner's legacy has long been tarnished by the death of Stompie Seipei, a 14-year-old boy kidnapped by her bodyguards in 1989 and found dead near her home. Well, his mother visited the murder scene on Wednesday and urged South Africans to stop listening to the rumours around her son's death. And she says she intends to go to Winnie Mandela's funeral on Saturday.
Matapela was 2 when her activist brother was murdered in 1989. 14-year-old Stompie Seipei was tortured and his body was later found near anti-apartheid stalwart Winnie Mandela's Soweto house. But nearly 30 years on, the circumstances surrounding the teenager's death remain unclear. His mother recalls that painful time.
After some time, Stompie's friends told me that Stompie was killed at Winnie Mandela's house in Soweto.
Tabiso Mono was one of the 3 boys kidnapped with Stompie by the Mandela United Football Club, a notoriously violent branch of the Soweto Youth Congress associated with Winnie.
Actually, she's the one that started the beating to all of us, and the rest followed for at least 1 hour, if not 2.
Stompie was falsely accused of being a police informant and taken away from South African Bishop Paul Verreyn, who was sheltering him and other youths at the time from apartheid police officers.
Certainly there was a mystique and a magnificence about her that made her a huge human being. But she's a human being. And just as bright as the sun could be, I think, so dark the night could be that she struggled with.
For her involvement in the matter, Winnie was given a 2-year suspended sentence. Later, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a post-apartheid restorative body, found Madikizela Mandela was aware of Stompie's assault and failed to take responsibility. The Mandela United Football Club coach Jerry Richardson was jailed for the murder in 1990. But Stompie's death tainted Winnie's legacy until she passed away in April.
Well, that's all for this edition of Eye on Africa. This is where I leave you, but do stay with us here on France 24. There's more news coming up.
On this week's episode of France in Focus, we're taking you to the set of thriller The Bureau for a sneak peek behind the scenes at a revitalised industry to ask whether French fiction can compete with its US and British rivals, whether French storytelling has evolved and what makes an export hit.
France in Focus on France 24 and France24.com.